Do you like the stew?
It's wonderful, Nolan.
I trusted him completely. But he just walked away one morning and never looked back. I still don't understand why.
2, 3, 4, 5.
You don't have to run anymore.
Crow Hollow Valley, Arizona Territory, late October 1879. The sand had teeth. Silas Cade learned this the hard way, face down, in the dirt blood running from a gash above his left eye, his horse long gone into the screaming wall of dust. The storm had come without warning, a beast made of wind and grit swallowing the horizon whole. One moment he'd been riding back from town with salt and coffee beans. The next, the sky turned brown, his mare reared, and the ground rose up to meet him like a fist. He tried to stand. His leg buckled, something torn, something wrong. The sand scoured his skin, filled his mouth, blinded him. He crawled 3 feet before his arms gave out. "This is how I die," he thought. "Not in the war. Not from fever. But alone in a valley that never wanted me." The last thing he saw before the darkness took him was a shape moving through the storm, a figure wrapped in cloth, pulling something behind her. A child. A boy. Then nothing. Before we continue this Wild West love story, take a moment to comment below, where are you watching from? And have you ever met someone who felt like home before you even knew their name? Your thoughts help these cowboy love stories reach the hearts that need them most. Silas woke to firelight. The ceiling above him was familiar rough-hewn beams, a water stain shaped like a crescent moon. His cabin. But the air smelled different. Smoke, yes, but also something else: crushed sage, something green and sharp. Medicine. He turned his head. Pain lanced through his skull, but he forced his eyes to focus. A woman sat by the hearth, her back to him. Long black hair fell past her shoulders, tangled from wind and dust. She wore a deerskin dress, faded and patched in places, and her hands moved with quiet precision over a small pot simmering on the fire. Beside her, curled under a wool blanket, slept a boy no older than 8. Silas tried to speak. His throat was sandpaper. The woman turned. Her face was angular, sun-darkened, with high cheekbones and eyes the color of creek water in autumn brown with flecks of gold. A thin scar ran along her jaw, pale against her skin. She didn't smile. She didn't flinch. She simply watched him the way a hawk watches movement in the grass. "You were dying," she said. Her English was clear but careful, each word placed like a stone in a stream. "The sand was burying you." Silas swallowed. "You brought me here. This is your house." She nodded toward the mantel, where a faded photograph sat Silas and a woman in a white dress. "Catherine, gone 3 years now. I carried you through your own door." He tried to sit up. His ribs screamed. She was beside him, in 2 strides, pressing a firm hand to his chest. "Don't. Your leg is wrapped. Your head is worse. You move, you bleed again." He looked at his left leg, bandaged tight, with strips of cloth, a poultice of crushed leaves beneath. Professional work. Better than the army surgeons who'd butchered boys in Virginia. "Who are you?" he asked. She returned to the fire, stirring the pot. My name is Nolan. The boy. Coda. My son. She glanced at the sleeping child, and for a moment, the hardness in her face softened into something raw. He has not slept well in many weeks. Tonight he sleeps. Silas studied her, the tension in her shoulders, the knife tucked at her hip, the way she positioned herself between him and the door. A woman on the run. A woman who trusted no one. There were men, she said quietly, not looking at him, following us. The storm hid our tracks, but they will come again. Before Silas could ask who, a gust of wind slammed against the cabin walls. The shutters rattled. Somewhere outside, something crashed, a barrel, maybe, or a fence post torn loose. Nolan froze. Her hand went to her knife. They both listened. The wind howled. Then silence, the heavy waiting kind. Just the storm, Silas said. Nayland didn't move for a long moment. Then slowly she exhaled. The storm is not what I fear. By morning, the wind had died to a low moan, and the world outside was buried in a fine layer of red dust. Silas watched through the window as the sun rose, painting the mess in shades of rust and gold. His head still throbbed, but the bleeding had stopped. Nolan's medicine was working. She was already awake, had she slept at all, kneeling by the doorway, one hand pressed flat to the earth. Her lips moved silently, her eyes closed. The gesture was simple, unhurried. Not a performance, a practice. Something she did every morning, the way Silas used to pray before he stopped believing anyone was listening. Coda sat nearby, watching his mother with solemn eyes. When Nolan finished, she touched her fingertips to her heart, then rose. Silas didn't ask what she'd said. Some things weren't meant to be translated. "I'll make coffee," he offered, swinging his legs off the bed. His left knee screamed in protest. He ignored it. Nolan shook her head. "You rest. I know where your things are." She moved to the stove, filling the kettle from the water bucket he kept by the door. Her movements were efficient, practiced, the hands of someone who had survived on less for longer than anyone should. Silas leaned back against the wall. "You saved my life." "Yes." Most people would have left a stranger in the sand. She didn't look up. Most people have not lost enough to know what it costs to let someone die. The words hung in the air, heavy as the dust outside. Coda tugged at his mother's sleeve and whispered something in a language Silas didn't recognize, soft, rhythmic, like water over stones. Apache, he realized. The boy was asking a question. Nolan answered quietly, then turned to Silas. "He wants to know if you have horses." "One. A mare. She ran during the storm." Silas rubbed his jaw. "Might have made it to the creek bed." "Might not." Coda's face fell. Nolan placed a hand on his shoulder, a small gesture, but the boy steadied. "When your leg is stronger," she said, "we will find her." "Where?" She met his eyes. "I do not leave debts unpaid. You have shelter." "I used it without asking." "I will work until we are even." Silas wanted to argue. She'd saved his life. She owed him nothing, but something in her expression stopped him. Pride. The kind that didn't bend, even when bending might be easier. "All right," he said. "But you're not a debt." You're a guest." For the first time, something flickered in her eyes. Not quite surprise, not quite warmth. Something closer to recognition. She didn't answer. She simply poured the coffee and handed him a cup. The day passed in small tasks. Nolan mended a tear in the blanket. Coda swept the floor, then swept it again when his mother pointed to a corner he'd missed. Silas cleaned his rifle, not because it needed cleaning, but because his hands needed something to do. By late afternoon, he'd managed to limp to the porch, leaning on a walking stick Nolan had fashioned from a juniper branch. The sky was clear, now impossibly blue, as if the storm had never happened. But the damage remained a section of fence knocked flat, the chicken coop door hanging by one hinge. Dust settled over everything like a burial shroud. Nolan appeared beside him, arms crossed. She studied the broken fence the way a general studies a battlefield. "I can fix it," she said. "So can I." "Not with that leg." Silas grunted. She had a point. Before he could respond, movement on the ridge caught his eye. A rider, maybe two, silhouetted against the afternoon sun. Too far to see faces. Close enough to see they'd stopped. Nolan went still. Her hand drifted to her knife. "Inside," she said, voice low. "Take Coda." "Who are they?" "Inside. Now." Silas didn't argue. He moved faster than his leg wanted back through the door. Coda was already standing, eyes wide, clutching a small leather pouch to his chest. Nolan followed, closing the door behind her, pressing her back to the wall beside the window. They waited. The riders didn't approach. After a long moment, they turned and disappeared over the ridge. Nolan exhaled slowly, but her hand stayed on her knife. "They're looking for you," Silas said. It wasn't a question. She nodded. "Why?" She didn't answer. Not yet. But her jaw tightened, and Silas saw something in her eyes. He recognized the look of someone who'd done what they had to do and was still paying for it. 3 days passed. Silas's leg healed enough to walk without the stick. His head stopped pounding. And slowly, carefully, the silence between them began to fill with something other than caution. They worked side by side, rebuilding the fence, patching the co-op, hauling water from the creek. The labor was honest, uncomplicated. There was a rhythm to it that Silas had forgotten existed. Two people moving in the same direction, anticipating each other's needs without words. Nolan worked harder than any ranch hand he'd ever hired. She carried posts that should have been too heavy for her shoulders. She dug post holes in ground that hadn't seen rain in weeks, the packed earth fighting every strike of the shovel. And she never complained. Not once. Not even when the blisters on her palms cracked and bled. Silas noticed. He noticed everything about her now. The way she paused each morning to touch the earth before beginning work. The way she hummed while cooking a low melody that rose and fell like wind through canyon walls. The way she checked the horizon every few minutes, even when her hands were full, always watching, always ready. Coda helped where he could, carrying tools, holding boards steady, watching everything with those solemn eyes. The boy rarely spoke, but when he did, it was always in Apache to his mother, and she always answered with patience. On the second day, Silas found Coda behind the barn, attempting to whittle a piece of juniper with a kitchen knife too large for his hands. "Careful," Silas said, kneeling beside him. "Hold it like this." He guided the boy's grip, showing him how to angle the blade away from his body, how to let the wood tell him where to cut. Coda listened intently, dark eyes following every movement. "What are you making?" Silas asked. Coda hesitated. Then, in halting English hoarse, "For Mother." Something cracked open in Silas's chest. He thought of the wooden toys he'd carved for children. He'd never had the empty nursery in the back of the cabin he hadn't entered since Catherine died. "A horse," he repeated. "That's good. She'll like that." They worked together until the sun slanted low, until the rough shape of a horse emerged from the wood, crude, lopsided, perfect. That night, Coda presented it to Nolan at dinner. She took it in both hands, turning it slowly, examining every cut. When she looked up, her eyes were bright. "Beautiful," she said, and pressed it to her heart. On the third evening, as the sun dipped below the mesa, Silas sat on the porch sharpening an axe blade. Nolan joined him, settling onto the top step with a grace that made the worn wood seem like a throne. The air smelled of sage and cooling earth. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called one long wavering note that echoed across the valley. Another answered. Then silence. For a while, neither spoke. The sky turned orange, then violet, then a deep bruised blue. "You were a soldier," she said finally. Silas's hands stilled on the blade. "How'd you know?" "The way you check the windows before you sleep. The way you listen for hoofbeats." She glanced at him. "The way you hold a rifle like it is part of your arm." He set the axe aside. "That was a long time ago. Some things do not become long ago. They stay." He didn't argue. She was right. "What about you?" he asked. "Before the running." "Before all this." Nolan was quiet for a moment. Her fingers brushed the string of beads around her neck, rough-hewn stones, each one a different shade of brown and red. "A gift, maybe, or a memory. I had a husband," she said. "Kuruk. A good man, strong but gentle. He found silver in the hills, not much, but enough for others to want it." Silas waited. A man came. Briggs. He wanted the land. Kuruk said no. So Briggs killed him. Her voice was flat, but her hands had tightened around the beads. "Made it look like he wandered off, like the desert took him. But I found his body. Coda found it first." The words hit Silas like a physical blow. He thought of the boy's silence, his watchfulness, the way he flinched at sudden sounds. "I'm sorry," Silas said. The words felt useless, but he meant them. Nolan shook her head. "Sorry does not bring him back." "Nothing brings him back." She released the beads. Briggs said I would follow, that he would finish what he started. So we ran. How long? 2 moons. Maybe more. The days blurred together. Silas stared at the darkening horizon. Somewhere out there, men were hunting a woman and her child for the crime of surviving. "He won't find you here," he said. Nolan turned to look at him, really looked the way she had that first night. Measuring. Deciding. "You do not know him." "No, but I know this land. I know this cabin. And I know He stopped, unsure how to finish. "You know what?" He met her eyes. "I know I'm tired of letting people disappear." Something shifted in her expression. Not trust, not yet. But the first crack in the wall she built around herself. She didn't answer. She simply turned back to the sunset and let the silence hold them both. The next morning, a rider appeared on the trail, not one of Briggs's men, but a traveling merchant, his mule laden with pots and cloth and news from the outside world. Silas traded 2 rabbit pelts for salt and information. The merchant was a small man with nervous eyes and a habit of looking over his shoulder even when speaking. He accepted coffee, gratefully wrapping his fingers around the tin cup like it might save him from something. "Storm's not done," the merchant said, wiping sweat from his brow. "Bigger one coming. 2 days, maybe 3. Saw it building over the Chiricahuas. Wall of red, like the devil's own curtain." Silas's gut tightened. "Anything else?" The merchant leaned closer, voice dropping. "Heard some men in town asking about an Apache woman, young with a boy. Said she burned something important, a map paper, something like that. Offering $200 for her." $200. A fortune in these parts. Enough to buy a new herd repair, a cabin start over somewhere far from Arizona territory. Silas felt the merchant watching him, calculating, wondering if the rancher might be interested in that kind of money. "They say who's offering." "Fellow named Briggs." "Railroad money." "Mean eyes." The merchant shrugged. "None of my business, mind you. Just passing along what I heard." He paused, glancing toward the cabin. "You out here alone, Mr. Cade?" Silas met his gaze steadily. "Just me and the horses. Been that way 3 years." The merchant nodded, but his eyes lingered on the small footprints near the water trough. He said nothing more. When he left, he rode north, the opposite direction from town. After he was gone, Nolan emerged from the barn where she'd been hidden. Her face was tight, controlled. "He saw the tracks," she said. "Yeah. He will tell them. Maybe. Maybe not." Silas watched the dust settle where the merchant had ridden. "Either way, we don't have much time." Nolan moved to stand beside him. The wind lifted her hair, carrying the faint scent of sage and wood smoke. She stared at the horizon, where clouds were beginning to stack like dark promises. "Briggs killed my husband for a map," she said quietly. "A piece of paper with marks on it. Kuruk spent 3 months drawing it. Every ridge, every creek, every place where the rock showed silver underneath." Silas listened. "I burned it the night he died. I burned Briggs's tent too, with him inside. He escaped, but barely." Her voice was steady, but her hands had curled into fists at her sides. Silas saw the white of her knuckles, the tension running through her like a wire about to snap. "That's why he's hunting you," Silas said. "That is why he will never stop." Silence fell between them. The wind shifted, carrying the smell of distant rain or dust. It was hard to tell the difference in this country. "There's something else," Nolan said. She hesitated, then reached into her pouch and withdrew a folded paper. "I kept this." "I don't know why." "Maybe to remind myself why we run." She handed it to him. It was a photograph, old, creased the edges, worn soft from handling. A man and a young boy stood in front of a mining operation, pickaxes in hand. The man was tall, severe, with the same hollow eyes Silas had seen in Briggs's men. The boy couldn't have been more than 12. Briggs, Nayland said, and his son. Before the accident, Silas studied the photograph. The boy was smiling, a genuine, unguarded expression that seemed impossible to connect with the man hunting them now. What happened to the boy? Cave in. The mine Briggs was building he pushed too fast, cut too many corners. The tunnel collapsed. Nolan's voice softened almost against her will. His son was inside. Briggs dug for 3 days with his bare hands. When they finally pulled the body out, she shook her head. He was never the same. Silas handed the photograph back. That doesn't excuse what he's done. No, but it explains. Nellen tucked the photograph away. I have thought about this many times. Whether a man's grief can become so large it swallows everything else. Whether it can turn him into something he was not meant to be. She looked at Silas, and he saw something in her eyes he hadn't seen before. Not fear, not anger, but a kind of terrible understanding. I do not hate him, she said. I am afraid of him. But I do not hate him. Silas thought about that. About the line between grief and madness, between loss and destruction. About the choices a person makes when everything they loved has been taken. I buried my wife in the field behind the barn, he said slowly. 3 years ago. Fever took her. I dug the grave myself, and when I was done, I didn't speak to anyone for 6 months. I thought about following her. About just stopping. Nolan was silent, listening. But I didn't. I don't know why. Maybe I was too tired. Maybe I was too stubborn. He paused. Maybe I just wasn't ready to give up on the possibility that something might still be worth living for. Nolan reached out and placed her hand on his forearm. The touch was light, almost hesitant, the first time she had voluntarily touched him since the night she'd bandaged his wounds. You stayed, she said. I stayed. And now? He looked at her, at this woman who had pulled him from the sand, healed him, worked beside him, told him her darkest truth without flinching. A woman who carried her grief like a weapon and her hope like a secret. Now I have a reason, he said. She didn't pull her hand away. And when the first drops of rain began to fall, warm, fat drops that left dark circles in the dust, they stood together on the porch and watched the storm gather. They came at dusk. Not Briggs himself, 2 of his men, riding slow eyes, scanning the property. They stopped at the edge of the yard, just beyond rifle range. Their horses were lathered with sweat coats, dark with dust. These were men who had ridden hard and intended to ride harder. Silas stepped onto the porch, weapon in hand, but not raised. The wood creaked beneath his boots, a familiar sound, a grounding sound. Evening, the taller one called. He had a beard the color of rust and a scar that split his left eyebrow in 2. Looking for a woman. Apache. Traveling with a boy. Seen anyone like that? Silas felt Nolan's presence behind him, hidden just inside the doorway, Coda pressed against her legs. He could hear the boy's breath, quick and shallow, the sound of fear trying to be silent. Just me out here, Silas said. Been that way for years. The shorter rider spat into the dust. He was younger, maybe 25, with the nervous energy of someone who hadn't yet learned that patience kept you alive in this country. Funny. Tracks say different. Looks like a woman's footprints by your creek. Small ones too. Like a child. Storm blew through. All kinds of tracks now. Coyotes, rabbits, the occasional deer. Silas kept his voice flat-bored. You boys are welcome to search if you don't believe me. But I'm telling you now, there's nothing here but dust and disappointment. The tall one smiled a thin, mean expression that didn't reach his eyes. Briggs is offering good money. $200. More than this ranch is worth, I'd wager. Hell, more than most men see in a year. Don't know any Apache woman. Don't want your money. Silas's finger rested against the trigger guard, not touching, but close. Suggest you ride on before the next storm hits. The Chiricahuas are building something fierce. You don't want to be caught in the open. The men exchanged glances. The younger one shifted in his saddle hand, drifting toward his holster. The tall one noticed and shook his head, a small, sharp motion. Suit yourself, the tall one said. He gathered his reins, but didn't turn away yet. His eyes moved across the property, the repaired fence, the smoke rising from the chimney, the fresh tracks in the yard that no amount of wind could fully erase. But Briggs doesn't forget. And he doesn't forgive. He's been riding for 2 weeks straight, barely sleeping. When a man wants something that bad, he shrugged. Well, you understand. They turned and rode north, disappearing into the purple dusk. Silas waited until they were gone, until even the dust of their passage had settled, then stepped back inside. Nolan stood in the center of the room, Coda clinging to her hand. Her face was pale but composed. They'll be back, she said. Yeah. With Briggs. Probably. Silas leaned his rifle against the wall, but kept his hand near the stock. Could be tonight. Could be tomorrow. Depends how close he is. Nolan knelt beside Coda, smoothing his hair, murmuring something soft in Apache. The boy's shoulders relaxed slightly, but his eyes stayed fixed on the door. We have weapons, she said, rising. We have walls. We have each other, Silas finished. She looked at him. In the dim light of the cabin, her eyes seemed darker, deeper pools that could swallow a man whole. Yes, she said quietly. We have that. That night, Silas couldn't sleep. He sat by the window, watching the darkness, listening for the sound of hoofbeats. The storm clouds had swallowed the stars, and the world beyond the glass was black and formless. Around midnight, he rose to check the perimeter. As he passed Nolan's satchel, left open by the door where she'd dropped it, while bringing in firewood, a paper slipped out onto the floor. He picked it up, meaning to tuck it back inside. The words stopped him cold. WANTEDF ORARS ONANDTHEFT. A PACHE WOMANAGE UNKNOWN TRAVELING WITHMALE CHILD CONSIDEREDANGEROUS REWARD $200 FOR, CAPTURE. $300 IFRECOVEREEDALIVE. Below the text, a rough sketch, not a perfect likeness, but close enough. Nolan's face, rendered in charcoal and accusation. The artist had captured the sharpness of her cheekbones, the defiant set of her jaw. Silas stood there, poster in hand, when Nolan's voice came from behind him. "You saw Saul." He turned. She stood in the doorway of the back room, wrapped in a blanket, her hair loose around her shoulders. Coda was asleep behind her, curled beneath a quilt. "I saw." Silence stretched between them. "I burned his map," she said. "I burned his tent. I would burn him too if I could. I would burn every man who thinks they can take what does not belong to them." Silas looked at the poster again. At the word DANGEROUS, at the price on her head. "What else did you burn?" he asked. She met his eyes without flinching. "His lies. His claim to our land. The papers that said he owned what was never his to take. The deed he forged with my husband's blood still wet on his hands." Silas folded the poster, slowly, deliberately. The paper crackled in the silence. "Good," he said, and handed it back to her. Nolan took it. For a long moment, she simply stared at him, at this stranger who had chosen her again and again without asking for anything in return. "You are not like other men," she said. "No," Silas agreed. "I'm not." She tucked the poster into her satchel. When she looked up, something had shifted in her expression, a softening, a letting go. "We should prepare," she said. "Dawn comes faster than we think." Yeah. Silas reached for his rifle. "It always does." The storm arrived with the dawn. It came, not as wind this time, but as a wall, a towering mass of red and black that swallowed the eastern horizon and roared toward Crow Hollow like a living thing. The sky darkened to the color of dried blood. The air turned thick, electric, hard to breathe. Silas could taste copper on his tongue, could feel the static lifting the hair on his arms. And with the storm came Briggs. Silas saw them through the swirling dust, 5 riders pushing hard against the wind, determined to reach the cabin before the worst hit. Their horses fought the galehead's lowered manes, whipping like flags of surrender. At their head rode a man in a black coat hat, pulled low face wrapped against the sand. Harlan Briggs. Even through the chaos, Silas recognized the set of his shoulders, the relentless forward lean. He rode like a man who had nothing left to lose because he didn't. "Inside," Silas said. But Nolan was already moving, pushing Coda toward the root cellar beneath the kitchen floor. The cellar was small, damp, smelling of earth and old potatoes. Coda descended the ladder with trembling hands, his face a pale oval in the darkness below. "Stay here," Nolan told him, pressing the leather pouch into his hands. "Do not come out until I call for you. No matter what you hear, no matter what happens, promise me." Coda's eyes were huge, terrified, but he nodded. "I promise," he whispered. Nolan kissed his forehead, a fierce, desperate kiss, then dropped the cellar door closed. She turned to Silas, knife in hand. "He's mine," she said. "He's got 5 men. Then we each take 2 and meet in the middle. Despite everything, the storm, the danger, the likelihood of death, Silas almost smiled.